I'm not sure what to make of this. It happened to me when I was 16, but just this past week I've been really thinking about it, and now I'm starting to lose sleep at night. It happened in the spring of 2008. I was staying with family in the Sierra Nevada mountains on the eastern side of California for a few weeks visiting. I love to fish. It's one of my true passions. Me and my cousin Bill decided to leave that night to fish for brown trout at a secluded alpine lake about 30 minutes from our location. Brown trout are more active at night, so we packed his Jeep up and headed out around 7 in the evening to give us time to drive there and set up before going after some big browns. The drive took us through some extremely remote and dense forest. Very beautiful, but the woods around there have a heavy, unnerving feeling about them. About 20 minutes into the drive, I asked my cousin if he could pull over so I could take a piss. He pulled over along the road on a very narrow shoulder. I got out, did my business, and hopped back in. We lit a cigarette, and as soon as he started to pull out, we stopped dead in our tracks. In front of our vehicle, probably about 30 feet in front of us, was a man in a white shirt and black pants. He had platinum blonde hair, and it was slicked back. The creepy thing was that he wasn't there when we pulled in, and it's like he just kind of appeared out of nowhere. He was facing the embankment on the other side of the road, so all we could see was his left side. He was holding what looked like a log or a big branch or something, and he was pointing it towards the embankment. We just sat there watching him for what seemed like an hour, but it was actually more like a minute. I finally snapped out of my trance and started nudging my cousin, telling him to go. As soon as we started to take off, the man turned his head towards us without moving his body. This is the part that makes my skin crawl and my stomach turn to this day. It's what I keep seeing at night. His face was completely blank, like a piece of white paper. All we could see was the reflection of our headlights where his face should have been. I freaked, and my cousin gasped. We turned the Jeep around and sped off. It didn't even cross our minds to think that maybe it was a person who needed help. We just took off. We couldn't come up with any logical reason why he didn't have a face. I thought maybe it was a mask, but I couldn't see any strings or edges. We didn't even go fishing that night, and we told the rest of our family what happened when we got back. They thought we were playing some kind of joke, but we know what we saw. To this day, it's kind of a joke within the family. It comes up every once in a while. What we saw that night was real, though. Hopefully somebody else out there has had a similar experience and can relate. But one thing I do know is that I'll never go back to those woods again. I'm from the UK. When I was 15, my parents used to own a static caravan holiday home. When I had a week off from school, we used to go up there. I had a friend, and his family would do the same. We used to sneak out with some beers at night, wander around while everybody else was sleeping. The holiday park was by the coast, and if you followed the trail, it would lead you to the top of some clay cliffs and a large grassy area with some ponds, farmland, and lots of bushes. There was a bench we used to sit on, overlooking the beach, and we would smoke cigarettes and drink beers and just generally have a good time. This one night, we decided to walk a bit further. It was dark, but the moonlight was shimmering and lighting up the pathway. Neither of us could hear anything. It was like all the noise had ceased. We were walking between two thick, bushy trees when I stopped suddenly because I heard a rustling in the bushes. Basically, there were two huge trees, and behind them was a dense, thick hedge about 6 feet high. I turned on my mobile phone light and saw two animal eyes reflecting back at me. I said to my friend that maybe it's a fox, so I moved a bit closer and had to duck under the branch to do so. Now I'm bent over, kind of squatting to get in and take a closer look. As I shined my light into the hedge, I saw what looked like a white oval-shaped rock. But then, the oval-shaped object turned, and what I saw haunted me for years now. What I thought was a funny-looking rock was actually a bald head. It was like somebody was lying on their back in the bushes. The head turned to me, and all I could see or make out were these inhuman black eyes. Although it looked humanoid, it just didn't feel human. I didn't notice the body of this creature, just the facial expression. It paralyzed me like a deer in headlights. I've never felt fear like that. I went white as a ghost, had goosebumps, and just completely incapable of moving. My fight or flight response then made me move. I turned and ran, bashing my head on the branch. I just shouted and ran to my friend. I expect that he saw my expression of fear, and he ran just like me. When we finally felt safe, and were back to the caravan park, I tried to explain what I actually saw, but it took a while for me to actually come to terms with it. The whole seeing the face probably lasted around 3 seconds. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it now. I do believe there are some things lurking in the dark that we really don't want to see. I unfortunately saw one of them, and I wasn't even looking for it. I just thought it was a fox. When I was in college, I worked a couple odd jobs to help pay the bills. They were mostly mundane, but one shook me to my core. I was working at the city parks and lake division at my local lake. It was a job that did involve some hard work, cleaning and repairing boats and motors, but it also had more than enough downtime. Whenever there was no work to do, my coworkers and I would sit around in the shade on the docks and just talk. When I first started, it was mostly the other guys telling stories about the lake. Most of them were your run-of-the-mill fisherman tales, but there were a few that were much darker, and it wasn't long before I started having my own odd encounters in the park. I split my time working there between the boat dock and working night security in the campgrounds. One night, as I was driving my work truck around the lake and into the campgrounds, I saw a pale blue light just above the road, probably 100 feet in front of my truck. As I got close, the light grew in intensity. Then, when I was about 30 feet away, it took on a smoky appearance and dissipated into the night. That incident was definitely odd, but not all that scary. The next two incidents I had during the night shift were definitely more disturbing and much more physical. Maybe a month after I saw the floating light, I was driving down the hill from the campground back to the lake when I saw a man running out of the bushes. He was dirty, terrified, and wearing only his underwear. The first thought I had was that he was on some sort of illicit substance. The campground was cheap, so we did have our fair share of that crowd coming in. I quickly realized, though, that this wasn't the case. The second he saw my truck, he came running towards me, clearly not looking to hurt me, but rather for me to help him. When he was still a few yards away, I was going to open my window to ask him what was wrong, when suddenly I saw a second person run out of the bushes. This time it was a woman. her legs scratched from running through the bushes without pants on. I was confused, to say the least, but that confusion quickly turned to terror when I saw that she was carrying a large knife. Obviously, this is what the man was running from. He didn't seem to notice her at first, so I motioned to the passenger door, hoping that he would get in so we could drive off and call the police before she got too close. As I was motioning him, that's when he spotted her. He looked me in the eyes, and I could tell he knew he should run to the truck. But I watched as panic overtook him, and he just ran. The woman chased after, both heading across the road and down into the bushes towards the lake. I drove off to the park ranger station and called the police. I could hear the echoes of the man screaming and the woman yelling. Later on that night, I talked to the police after they handled the situation. The man had been stabbed, but he would live. And I went home, obviously shaken. 2 months after that, I was driving the truck through the campground when I saw what looked like a military-style duffel bag hanging from the trees. The closer I got, the more definition the shape took, and sadly, the more human it started to become. By the time I got to the campsite, I already had the police on the phone. I never worked the night shift again after that. I thought if I worked strictly during the day, I wouldn't have to deal with this stuff anymore. I was wrong, somewhat. I worked an entire summer without incident, but it was during the winter that this happened. This one was less physical, just a little more unexplainable. It was a cold winter, by San Diego standards at least. Many times, my shift would start before sunrise, having to get the boats ready for all the fishermen coming in the early morning hours trying for trout. On one particular morning, I got to work around 5 a.m. It was cold, mid-30s, frost still on the ground. I walked straight onto the docks and into the shed we used as a workshop. Most of the mornings, the only employees at the park were me, a young woman who worked a concession stand, and a park ranger. Often, the park ranger would come down to the docks about 20 minutes into my shift to make sure I had everything I needed. On this morning, I was inside the workshop with the door closed, space heater on, and was working on a broken motor. I could tell when somebody was walking on the dock, because it would make the whole shed I'm in slightly bob in the water. I felt the dock rise and fall beneath my feet, but kept at my work, assuming it was just the ranger outside. I could tell the footsteps went to the door, paused for a second, and then continued towards the end of the dock. After about 5 minutes, without feeling the footsteps return, I opened the door to see what the ranger was up to. I looked to the end of the dock, but no one was there. I assume I must have mistaken the slight waves of the water for footsteps, but noticed the water was smooth as glass, and that all the boats were tied up. I took a step out of the shop to get a better look and could hear the crunch of frost under my feet. When I looked down, I noticed that there were 2 sets of footprints. One was mine, going from the shore straight up to the shop. The second went past the shop and down towards the end of the dock and stopped. No footprints coming back, no footprints going off the dock. I turned around and saw the ranger coming out of his truck, walking towards me. That's when I decided to quit, once he got within earshot. I'll preface this by saying I don't really know whether I believe in ghosts or not, but I promise this story is true. I guess that's what everybody says though, whether the story's true or not, but take this as you will. I'd love to hear what you think it might have been, and if anybody else has had any similar experiences. I'm originally from Wales, but from 2004 to 2017, my dad owned and operated a bed and breakfast in a renovated 16th century watermill in the Indre Valley in France. I helped him out there for a few seasons while I was out of work. The main building had 4 floors with 5 letting bedrooms, and in the winter, when we had fewer guests, we would move from the flimsy little modern chalet next door into these guest rooms, which were warmer and more comfortable. The top floor, the attic bedroom, was always the first to become available. We didn't like using it for our guests when we weren't fully booked because it meant climbing a lot of stairs. The last flight being a wooden spiral staircase. It was difficult for our older visitors or families that had lots of suitcases. The attic room itself was roughly an L shape, occupying the whole upper story with sloping ceilings, heavy oak beams, and a sort of suite-style living room at one end of the L. I remember while staying up there one night, waking up groggily with a weird certainty that somebody else had been in the room. For some reason I thought at first it might have been my niece, who would have been 3 or 4 years old at the time. My next thought was that one of the guests downstairs must have wandered up into the wrong room by mistake. It was too dark to see, but I could hear with absolute clarity a series of shuffling footsteps. I described them at the time as sounding like bare feet treading on carpet, coming towards me from the lounge part of the room. These footsteps approached until they were right next to the bed, and when they stopped, I felt as if someone had leaned over very close above my face. Kind of the way you can just feel it when somebody else's face is right next to yours in the dark. Whatever it was remained there for several seconds, not moving, and then the soft footsteps began again, shuffling away back into the far end of the suite. Weirdly, I don't remember feeling afraid in the moment, but recounting it the next day, it really shook me, and thinking about it makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't a threatening feeling, but what lingers with me is that there was a deep sense of foulness and unpleasantness about it. When I brought it up to my dad, he did say guests occasionally mentioned having strange, eerie feelings in that top floor room. That's it anyways. I know it's not super scary, but that's the unembellished truth to the best of my recollection. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed what you saw today, feel free to hit that like button and maybe consider subscribing. If you really like what you saw, I have a few other videos on my channel. Feel free to check them out. Alright, hope you have a good night. Bye.